You can open up your Bibles to Daniel chapter 11. Now, this is something I've been talking about, that Daniel chapter 11 is not a normal book or chapter of the Bible that people preach through unless you're preaching book by book, verse by verse. Daniel chapter 11, Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 10, like even Ross last week. These are some tough, I mean, this is like apocalyptic literature, okay? And so some of it is. And so it's like, all right, what do we do with Daniel chapter 11? So I hope as we kind of sit down, we'll appreciate the work of going through some of this. And Daniel chapter 11 is kind of looking at the end. I just called it at the end. Now, when you go hiking with kids, okay, you have to do a few things. I've done this a few times. We have a few kids. We like to go camping in the mountains, apparently at Matt's house. And to be honest, if you're gonna go hiking with kids, well, you gotta do a couple things. One, you need to be honest with them. Okay, you gotta tell them how long it's gonna be. If you're like, oh, this is gonna be real quick, and then it's like 4 hours in, like there's a revolt on your hands. So you have to be able to be like, no, this is how long it's gonna take. You also have to tell them how difficult this is gonna be. This is not going to be an easy hike. We're hiking in the mountains. We're trying to get a couple miles in, okay? You're telling them that this is gonna be hot. You also have to bring a ton of water and a ton of snacks. Okay, you wanna just trust me on this one. You wanna have at least 3 backpacks per child, okay? Full of snacks. If you're gonna 4-mile hike requires that much. But the biggest thing that you need to have when you go hiking with kids is you better be building up what's at the end. Okay, you have to. For some of my kids, you build it up by telling them that there's 2 s'mores and a can of soda at the end of this hike, okay? There are several of my other kids are starting to cost a little bit more to get to that, what's at the end. But, if you're hiking to a waterfall, you are talking about how massive, like, I feel bad. We did this hike at the Smokies this last year. And we built up this waterfall that we were hiking to, and we got there, and it was just a little trickle. But you want to know the funny thing is? Okay, Mike and Ellen are gone. Jaden's here. I lied to her, but she's right here. They all acted like it was the greatest thing they've ever seen in their entire life because we sat there the whole time and we built it up. And if you're going to get your kids through that hike, I got to be careful. I just had ACL surgery. I'm going to get all excited and I'm going to trip and fall. So just somebody remind me I don't have my brace on. But when you get to the end, you're building this up. If you want them to get there, you're telling them how grand this is going to be because it's worth the hike. Well, here God is telling Daniel a lot of these things. He is letting Daniel know that the journey is going to be difficult, that there are going to be a lot of hard things. In fact, he's showing them, not Daniel and the Israelites, how ugly this world is really going to be because of sin. God is also showing Daniel what is going to happen to each and every ruler between the end of Daniel's time and the end of Jesus' time. He's laying this all out. Every ruler, every nation on earth, and in the end, it doesn't seem worth it to a lot of these nations and these rulers. The end doesn't seem like it actually panned out to what they thought it was going to be. It doesn't matter if the people that they followed or if they were the people that were ruling the nation. In the end, it didn't look good. And God is telling Daniel all of these things to prepare them, to get them ready, but ultimately to show them at the end, only one person is still going to be standing. Only one person is still going to be there, and he's worth it. And he's worth it. Now, my big idea this morning, okay, is a lot. My big idea is that God knows the future, controls the outcome of nations, uses them for his purpose, and at the end, only his kingdom will last. I'm going to leave that up there for a minute because that's a little bit. I tried to get it smaller. I literally worked on this sermon And and finally I was like, that's it. I'm just going to go long. So you guys have to write it down. But God knows the future, controls the outcome of nations, uses them for his purpose, and at the end, only his kingdom will last. But why does this matter? Why does this matter to us? Well, it gives us hope. It brings peace and rest. It helps us prepare for this life. Why? Because our life, our world around us is chaos. When we look at the nations, when we look at the rulers, when we look at the things that are happening, the rise and the fall, we attach ourselves to kings and to nations, to rulers, to parties. We attach ourselves to everything that we think is going to bring us satisfaction, is going to bring us hope, that we're going to be able to finally find rest because they're going to be the thing that brings a lasting life that we think. And then what happens when they fall and they end? But God already knows that. God's not going to be fallen. God is not going to be ending anytime soon or ever. And if you really think about it, how much hope, how much fear comes from the trust that you put in people that fail you? If you took that out, man, how much rest would your soul have? If you found your peace in a God that was never going to die, that's what's happening here. So we're covering Daniel, okay? And Daniel chapter 11 is at the end of Daniel's life. And Daniel and the Israelites have been in captivity under the Babylonian and now the Persian Empire for about 70 years. And they got taken into captivity because of their sin against God. God rescued and saved Israel, brought them out of Egypt. He took something that wasn't a nation and made them a nation, and he gave them himself. Through the sacrifice, the sacrificial system, through the temple. But Israel continually sinned against God, time and time again. And now, right here, when we see Daniel, like I've been talking about, Daniel, they are in captivity because of their sin against God. And at Daniel chapter 11, they're about to finally come to the end of that time. But most of the prophecy and most of what God has told Israel kind of stops at this point. But here God is speaking, we probably through the angel Gabriel, as Ross was talking about last week in chapter 10. But here God is laying out for Daniel what's coming after their 70 years. And he is telling them this for several reasons. We're going to kind of cover some of these things. But the first thing that we see here is that God has shown his knowledge and control of the nations. Look at verse 1, starting in chapter 11. I'm going to read through this. It says, and as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up and confirmed and strengthened him. So it's the angel, the messenger that's currently speaking here that Ross preached on last week. He was a great sermon. I'd go back and listen to it if you want to get a little more of the context. But Daniel was praying as he knew that the 70 years was coming up. He didn't know what was supposed to happen. And so he was praying for God to answer him. And God did through this angel, probably Gabriel. Okay, and now Gabriel's there, and he's saying, listen, as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, so the Israelites were taken into captivity by Babylon, but now the empire's switching. It's going from Babylon to the Persian and Medos, whatever they are, empire. Okay, you guys know what Medos are? It's like the minions in. That's what my kids called it because they said, the Beto. So every time I see this, that's what I think. You guys know what I'm talking about, the little yellow guys? Okay, thanks. But it's not them, the Darius the Mede. But what he's saying is I, the angel, stood up and strengthened him. And so he's even talking about even the changing of the empires was strengthened by the angel of God. Okay, and every empire that is changed is through the hands of God. Then we pick up in verse 2, he says, and now I will show you the truth. 3 more kings shall arise in Persia. And the fourth shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against the kingdom of Greece. Then the mighty kings shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, the kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the four winds of heaven, but not for his prosperity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to the others beside these. Then the kings of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he shall rule, and he shall rule, and his authority shall be great authority. And after some years, they shall make an alliance with the daughter of the king of the south, and shall come to the king of the north to make a great agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attention, and he who fathers her, and he who supported her in those times. And from a branch, from those her roots, one shall arise in his place, and he shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the kings of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods, with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. For some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north, and then the latter shall come into the realm of the kings of the south, but shall return to his own lands. His son shall wage war against the assembly of a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming in overflow and pass through, and again shall carry war for as far as his fortress. And then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the kings of the north. And he shall arise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again arise a multitude greater than the first, and for some years he shall come up with a great army and abundant supplies. If you go on, all the way to verse 21, even past verse 21, but through verse 21, it's the same thing. Okay, and you look at this and you read this and you're like, what on earth is going on? He shall come and she shall fall, the kings of the north and the kings of the south, and this army is going to take this army, and this person is going to be raised up, and this person is going to be taken down, and then this is going to happen from their root. And you're like, what on earth? Why is he telling? Okay, so what's happening right here? All right, this angel is telling Daniel, every king, every offshoot, every nation that's going to rise up from the end of his time until the Roman Empire. You can go and put that up. Put that slide up there. We were supposed to have a big screen, but we couldn't get the projector to work. But can you put that slide up there anyways? Can you put that? Is it up there? Okay, so you can't read any of that. Okay, I promise you. There was supposed to be a little bit bigger. We had a big slide that we were going to put up there, but the project, they hid the remote. Who hides the remotes on us, honestly? But they hid the remote on us. But if you look at this slide, okay, it's in your, I showed it right out of your ESV study Bible. So if you have a ESV study Bible, you could go up and look. And what this is, okay, that side is the north, that side's the south. So when you read through the north and the south, it's there. And if you go through there, there are all the kings of the south, and all the kings of the north, and all of the offshoots, and all of the women who are included, the princes that are included in there, with all of the dates. And when you go through modern history and you look up everything predicted in Daniel chapter 11 happened. I mean, even like, if you look, there's this, like in verse chapter 7, there's a branch from her roots, and one shall rise in his place. And she's in there. Okay, one of the princes ended up ruling over here, Cleopatra, okay? She's like, if you go 1, 2, 3, 4 down, there's 2 of them, and then the one of them, then Cleopatra, okay, literally, angel Gabriel is being kind of vague, but then when it plays out, it's all there. everything all the way, there's all these little snippets all the way to Daniel 11, chapter 20. I'm going to get to that guy in a second. But just go home today and read this and then go look at the history, and it lines up perfectly, like mind-blowingly perfectly. And what Daniel is doing, or what God is doing to Daniel right now, is he's saying, listen, I know this. He's prophesying this before it ever happens, and he's doing this so that it can be tested. He's doing it ahead of time so that when Israel is facing times of hardship and difficulty, and they're trying to remember the promises of God, is God really trustworthy? Yes. Because he has shown his knowledge, and he controls the nations. I mean, it's in great detail. He knows the rises and the falls. He knows the branches and the offshoots. I mean, go look at that, and you literally start looking at these like offshoots and branches, like, why is this in here? And then you go back and read through history, and that's exactly what happened. He knows the armies. I mean, like, literally, he talks about the armies that go out, and then they fail, and then they come back, and then you go study, and then like these kings would raise up these great armies, and then they fail, and they come back and plunder here, and I wanted to show you guys that on a bigger screen. I was going to point to it and use like laser pointers, but it is what it is. But ultimately, okay, it's picture perfect. It talks about the three kings that arise in Persia. And that's exactly what happened. And then the three kings was taken over by Greece, which is Alexander the Great. And then Alexander the Great died, and then four kings took over his space, or his empire. Okay? And then you have Ptolemy the First. He's the king of the south. And he was a very capable general under Alexander, the ruler of Egypt. And he's kind of that first where all of that flows from him. And then one of the other kings of the Greece is on the north side. And man, it's just go back and study it. But it's there. And so, one of the things that as you read through this, we need to understand is God controls it all. But also God knew the brutality of it all. I mean, just look at all the wars and people coming up and killing, and the armies and the slaughter, but God knew it all ahead of time. God knew that the sin in this world, the empires that it produces are ugly. He's letting Daniel know that. He's preparing the Jews for their wait for Jesus' return. But not only that, okay? I mean, a brief amount of verses, 20 verses here. What happens to every one of these kings and their empires? They all die. They raise up their power, the most powerful. Like in every one of these, the next one was greater than the next, and the next one was greater than the next, and the next one was more powerful, and the next one was more powerful, and everyone died. None of them lasted. Every nation that thought they were something ended. God knows how it's going to happen, and God controls it. God was getting them ready to show his power over the nations. God wanted Israel to see that he knew what was going on. He showed his knowledge, and he showed his control of the nations so that Israel would trust him. When you go, you guys ever hear Half Dome? It's in Yosemite. Okay, so I had a roommate one time. He's crazy. We call him Trapper John. He's from Washington. And he used to rock climb Half Dome. Okay, and it's just like it's like a 2-day rock climbing extravaganza. But on the backside, you can still actually hike up it. But even so, it's still one of the most dangerous hikes in all of the modern United States. Okay, there's one point where the Park Service has installed these steel cables and wooden planks that go up the final 400 feet of the climb, and like 13 people have died in the last 10 years just on that part of the climb alone. Okay, and this is a hike. There are over 250 responses to that section of this hike alone. Okay, now to that, they only allow 300 people to get to this hike daily, and at that, only 50 are allowed to go up. So 300 people have to make the hike before it, just to get to the opportunity to try to do it. Okay, and the hike before it is like this misty something or other. It's misty, I forget what it's called, but it's this misty hike where on average, 1.5 people die every year on that part, like the hike to get to the hike. Okay, so picture with me, okay? You want to go on this hike. It's this crazy, one of the most dangerous hikes in the modern United States. And you want to do this. You can take one person, okay? One person. Who are you going to take to hike with you up Half Dome? Are you going to take the urban camper? Okay, the urban camper who knows everything because he's read a lot of blogs and has every REI gadget known to mankind and will survive perfectly on the hike from his office to his car. Okay, we all know that person, right? Like, they know it. They've read their stuff. They understand what they're getting into. They have all of the right rain jackets, and they know what to do in every scenario, but have never actually been there. Or do you take the guy who's actually done it, or the girl who's actually done it, who has the exact right equipment for that hike because they've done it several times? They know what it's like. They've studied the weather. They've been on that trail. Are you going to take the urban hiker or the one who actually knows what they're doing? Come on, who are we going to take? Let's be honest, we all have that urban hiker friend, right? We know that guy, okay? But we're going to take that guy. Why? Because they've been there. They've shown it. They know it. That's exactly what God is doing right now. God is saying, I know what's coming. I know the rise and fall of nations. I know what's before. I know what's after. I know that this world is a messed up place because of sin, and it's not getting any better. I understand what is going on. And here's the thing, church, why do we trust in nations and people and authority for our hope and peace of mind when we can just go back and see history and understand that it will always fail? But God is still there. God is the one that knows. God is the one that creates it all and has seen the rise and fall of every nation and every ruler, and he's still here. We need to take our hope off of the nations, off of the rulers, and see God and trust him. We look around and we see wars and rumors of wars, and it's easy to feel like everything's out of control, but it's not. God knows what's going on. God has seen this before. Sin in this world is ugly, and we a lot of times think, that this world is getting better, and we think, it's pretty good, and we're slowly getting better. But if we go back and look at history, that's not the case. That's not what's happening, that this world is a very ugly place because of our sin. But God shows us that he is, even in the midst of that, is still in control. So God has shown us that he has shown us his knowledge, and he's shown us that he's in control of the rise and fall of nations. But two, God even uses evil nations for his bidding. Not only does he know that what is happening, and not only does he know and control what is going on, but he actually uses things for his bidding. Flip over to verse 21, okay? So in verses 2 through 20 of Daniel, he hits a list of a bunch of kingdoms and empires, and then he camps out for a little bit. Okay, he camps out for a little bit on the same guy in verse 21. And we've talked about this guy a few times, and his name is Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, so you want to go back to that chart, whatever. So he is one, two, he's one of the northern kingdoms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down in the middle right there. So Cleopatra's right there, but Antiochus Epiphanes is right in the middle. And and we're camping out on him. And he's been brought up before a few times. He's the little horn back in chapter 8. And this is the guy who is coming to persecute the Jews. Okay, all of these other kings, they were just taking over lots of other nations and lots of other, they were just rise and fall. But this guy had something against the Jews. Let's look at him starting in verse 21. It says, in his place shall arise a contemptible person whom royal majesty is not given. So every other one of these kings, if you go up and again, go study that timeline, all these other kings are royal. But when you study the history of Antiochus Epiphanes, he's not from a royal family. He's kind of an average Joe who makes his way up for the ranks and then forcefully takes over, and then people follow him. Okay, and in this place, so again, this is a prophesying about him. But when you go back, and it's crazy how much this lines up. He's a contemptible person who royal majesty has not been given. He shall come without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, and even princes of the covenant. Talking about Israel there. And from that time, from the time that the alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the riches of the parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his father nor his father's fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up a power in his heart against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall wage war against an exceedingly great and mighty army, and he shall not stand, for his plots shall be devised against him. And again, go back and study this guy. He does all these great things. He beats all of these nations, and then he gets this really crazy plot in his mind, and he goes and does it, and then he's defeated, and then he comes back sulking. That's exactly what they're talking about here. He stirs up, he has a mighty army, but he shall not stand, for the plots shall be devised against him. And even those who eat his food shall break against him, and his army shall be swept away, and many shall fall and slain. Okay, so he does this, and he comes back. He's licking his wounds. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. So now, again, he tries to partner with this other king, but they're going to be bent on doing evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be appointed. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. So this guy goes, okay, he fights and does all these great things, and then he tries to take over this other kingdom, and he can't do it. And so then he sits down and he tries to then devise a plan with this king he tried to take over, and he's not able to do it to the extent that he wants. And so he comes back with some plunder, but he's coming back licking his wounds. And you want to know what he does on his way back? He stops in Israel and sacks it. Okay? That's exactly what Antiochus Epiphanes did. And he grabs all of this wealth. And he says, and he shall and he shall return to his own land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant. That's talking about Israel there. And so that's what this guy does. He comes back and he takes out Israel. And at the point in time, he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before for ships of Kittim. This is telling you that he's going to try to do the same thing again. So he comes back licking his wounds, then he goes back out again, and he's going to go out and try to fight the same king again. But the ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw and turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant again. Do you want to know how when Antiochus Epiphanes, when he goes out the second time to try to take out the other king again, what stops him? Can you guess? Ships! A fleet of ships! Like, it's right here. And he comes back, and on his way back, he gets angry and he takes out again on the people of Israel. He says, he shall turn back and pay no attention to those who forsake the holy covenant, and the forces from him shall appear to profane the temple and the fortresses, and they shall take away the regular burnt offerings, and they shall be set up the abomination that makes the desolation, and he shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among them, the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall be subdued, or they shall stumble by the sword and by flame and by captivity and plunder. And when they stumble, they shall receive a little help. And with many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined and purified and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. Okay, so here's what's happening. There's a lot here. But this is the end of the time of Israel. And what this angel Gabriel is telling Daniel is at the end of all of these nations rising and falling, a lot of these nations coming and going, is this one guy we've looked at a few times who is going to viciously sack Israel multiple times, God's people. And this is a punishment. Okay, Israel is meant to be the people of God, to represent God to the nations. They were given the holy covenant and they don't follow it. They sin against a perfect and holy God, and instead of displaying the nations, they take on the very worship that the nations has. And so this is a payment for their transgressions, for their sin, because it couldn't be overlooked. And this guy's going to do abominable things. He's going to put himself in the place of the temple. He's going to cut off their burnt offerings, and that is a sign of him cutting off their ability to be able to worship God and the presence of God to be there. But in that time, okay, and this is a time when Israel hasn't done a good job. But in that time, Israel is going to raise up. In fact, we know actually out of this time, Israel becomes one of the strongest that they've been since their captivity. It's at the end of the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, and it's led by this guy named Judas Maccabees. Okay, you might have heard of him. He creates a revolt and brings back a lot of the temple worship and the things of God right after this time. Why? Well, it says it right here. And the wise among the people shall make many understand for some days, and even though they stumble by sword and flame and captivity, when they stumble, they shall receive a little bit of help. And many shall join themselves with the flattery, so many will turn against the wise and turn over to Antiochus Epiphanes. And some of the wise will even stumble because of it, but that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it's still awaiting its appointed. God is using this evil king to refine his people. This people who no longer needed the God who brought them out of Egypt, the God who no longer brought them into the land of Israel, the God who then brought them into Babylon because they were faithless and then brought them back into Jerusalem. The people who continually turned their face against God, who didn't need God, were reminded that they needed God through the rule of an evil king. They were refined, purified. You know, every human achievement requires suffering. The greatest achievements require the greatest suffering. I mean, think about we're going to be watching the Olympics. Like the Olympics? I'm a big Olympic fan, okay? What's your summer Olympic sport? Anybody? What are you guys watching? I like discus. Discus is just kind of my, rowing. Rowing, can you get beyond rowing? Is that really really? Oh, all right. Maybe if you were a rower, we have, and one of my favorite parts in all of these Olympic athletes is the stories that they show behind it. Okay. The amount that these people, the suffering that these people have to go through to get to the place where they achieve greatness. I mean, the mental training, the physical training, the eating, the sleeping, just like the amount of suffering that they go through to cut off everything that so easily entangles them so that they can be what they're supposed to be as an Olympic athlete. Like every Olympic athlete takes punishment and suffering to make them better. But that's the case for all humanity. Suffering is one of the greatest producers of human achievement. But also in our spiritual realm, that's the same case. Suffering is what produces God's greatest work in us. We don't understand our need of God until we've suffered. And you want to know the greatest example of that? Jesus. Jesus left heaven where he lived in perfection, and he gave that up to suffer with us, to live a perfect life, and then to die for us. In fact, Hebrews chapter 5 reminds us that Jesus was made perfect in his suffering. Isn't that crazy? The Bible tells us that Jesus was made perfect in his suffering. Why? Because up to that point, Jesus God had never experienced suffering as a human being. But when Jesus came down and put on flesh, he suffered like us. But the one thing that Jesus did is he endured a suffering that he didn't deserve, because Jesus never sinned. See, Israel here is suffering because of their sin against a perfect and holy God. And the nations, their rise and fall is a punishment for their never acknowledging God as their creator and savior. We see the rise and fall of nations because of the sin that's in this world. And Israel received their punishment because they sinned against the perfect and holy God. But Jesus never sinned. Jesus took on flesh, was born as a human, but never sinned, but still suffered. All of humanity deserves the suffering that we bear because we sin against a perfect and holy God. That section right there where it talks about pure and holy, okay? God is perfect. God cannot have sin in relation to him. He would cease to be God, and that's a good thing. If we're talking about a ruler that lasts, that is watching over kingdoms and nations, we don't want a God who allows a little bit of sin, who allows a little bit of brokenness. No, we want a perfect and holy God, but for God to be perfect and holy, he cannot be in the presence of sin. So he sent his son, Jesus. And his son, Jesus, lived a perfect and holy life and suffered the worst death. Taking all of our sin. The greatest suffering wasn't his death. It was the separation that he experienced with his Father. He had always lived in perfect harmony with his Father. But the physical aspect of Jesus, when that died on the cross, he felt separation. God turning his face away because of him taking our sin. God's greatest act of love to us was shown through suffering. Our refinement comes through suffering. Suffering produces pure and holy. You and I if you are a follower of Jesus, you are made pure and holy because of his suffering. And here we see God using that. God using suffering through the nations, through his people. And a lot of times it's like, God, why? And we look around and we see the brokenness and we see all of these things happening, and it feels like everything is falling apart. Even with the church, even when you look around and you see the persecution of the church, as the American church, yes, a little bit to some extent, but you look around to other nations out there and man, those churches are persecuted, Saudi Arabia and other places. And you look, it is mind-boggling what a lot of these people go through. It's like, is God at work? Yes. That suffering produces a love and a desire for God more than we could ever understand. So God uses suffering to bring us closer, to purify us, to make us more like Jesus, to say no to this world and yes to him. And here's the crazy thing, okay? God even uses evil nations and kings to bring about his purpose. Even when there's evil kingdoms, even when there's evil people in authority, even when things are broken, God is still working. God is still using that. There has never been a moment in all of history where this has been out of God's control, not even for a second. And he's using it all for his purpose. So not only does God show us his knowledge and his control of nations, God uses evil nations to do his bidding. And then lastly, and I'm in this, at the end, the greatest human power will just end. Okay, I know that English isn't the greatest, but there's a reason why I said it that way, okay? I know Ashley, when she was probably making this slide last night, she was cringing because I didn't use great English. But at the end, okay, the greatest human power will just end. Okay, now here's something. I want to, at the end of verse 35 to verse 36, there's a switch. Okay, I want you to look at it. The first two sections that we looked at are both things that have already passed, things that God predicted but already happened. But here in verse 36, this is actually a new God, okay? And look what it says. It says, the king shall do as he wills, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and he shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. Now, if you look at Antiochus Epiphanes, a lot of what he did is very similar to what this next guy is going to do, okay? Because Antiochus Epiphanes was an antichrist type. He was pointing to something more. He was coming to fight against God's people, but he was pointing to the Antichrist that's going to come. But a couple things, okay? Antiochus Epiphanes, he worshipped the Greek gods. And when he worshipped false gods in the temple, instead of putting himself on the throne, he put the Greek gods on the throne. He offered sacrifices to the Greek gods on the throne in 166 BC or something. I have to go back and look. But and so it talks about the desolation, the abomination of desolation. That's the moment that he did it. But when the Antichrist does it, that we see in other places, he puts himself on the throne. So there's differences here. Another difference is Antiochus was from the north and he attacks the south. Okay, as you look at this guy, both the south and the north attack him. Okay, so this is a different person. Why? Okay, just as like we talked about in Daniel chapter 9, there's a gap in this prophecy. Okay, there's the first parts are from the end of Daniel's time, leading up to the time of Jesus, when Jesus dies on the cross, when his time is ended. At that time, the church time starts. We live in the time of the church body. That's where we are. Okay. But all of God's promises to Israel aren't done yet. God hasn't completely fulfilled all of them, and he's going to later on. And this prophecy takes a gap because right now we're living in the church age, but there will be a time when Israel comes back and God fulfills his promise to Israel. And it's going to be right after this time with the Antichrist. And so what this prophecy is pointing to is that time. It's getting them ready. So the first half of the prophecy is getting them ready for what's happening right afterwards. And the last part of the prophecy is getting them ready for what's happening at the very end. The seventh week, the last week in Daniel chapter 9 that we studied before. But there's a jump here, okay? Now follow me with this, okay? It says, and the king shall do as he wills, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. And he shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished. For what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers or to the beloved women or beloved by the women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the gods of the fortress instead of these, the God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with the God of silver and the precious stones and the costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortress with the help of the foreign god. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor. He shall make them rule over many and shall divide the land for a price. And at the end, the king of the south shall attack, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, and the chariots and the horsemen and with many ships. And he shall come into countries, and he shall overflow and pass through, and he shall come into the glorious lands, and tens of thousands shall fall. But these shall be delivered out of his hand, Edom and Moab, and their main parts of the Ammonites. And he shall stretch his hand out against the countries at the land, and in the land of Egypt shall not escape. And he shall become the ruler of treasures of gold and silver, all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and from the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with a great fury to destroy and devote to many destruction. He shall pitch his tents between, or he shall pitch his partial tents between the sea and the glorious mountains. And then what happens? Somebody say it. What happens? What happens? He comes to an end with none to help him. So see what happens here, okay? This is all happening, what I believe will happen after the rapture of the church. Believers will be raptured up into heaven, and this is the time where Israel, where God kind of focuses back on Israel, and this person, what I believe is the Antichrist, is being raised up. And I believe that there are a lot of, First John reminds us that there are a lot of antichrists along the way, and there have been a lot of people who, and empires and nations and rulers who've been terror. I mean, think of Hitler, people like Hitler and Stalin, and think about all these different genocidal things even happening now. These are all just like Antiochus Epiphanes, men who are in the image of the Antichrist. They're killing and slaughtering and using their own authority for themselves. But there's going to come a time when there is going to be one. Okay? And the picture that is being drawn here is the most powerful human ruler throughout all of history. That's who this is going to be. The Antichrist is going to be this person who comes in and within 7 years, basically not even, less than 7 years, basically 3.5 years, is going to conquer the known world to some extent. And he's gonna weasel his way in, and everybody and their mom is trying to predict who the Antichrist is going to be. These chapters and verses are not meant for you to predict who the Antichrist is going to be. Okay, I'm going to tell you that right now. Your charts and things like that, don't worry about those things. Okay, this is pointing to something more than that. When you take these and you take Revelation and you start trying, maybe this person's the Antichrist, or maybe I think that nation. No, that's not what this is doing. Okay, this story is still about God. And I want to make that very clear. And what is happening here, okay, is this guy is being built up. And this person, he's raising up these nations. He's taking out, he's working himself into the authority over all of the known world. And he's doing it with a power that is of foreign gods, so a demonic power. And not only is there a demonic power, but he is setting himself on the throne and in place of the fathers and the fathers of the fathers and the fathers' gods. He's putting himself in place. He's setting himself against gods. He's attacking both the north and the south, and he's still winning. And he's persecuting, he says, by 10,000s or 10,000s God's people. And he's paranoid because he doesn't want to lose his power, and so he sets himself up. And at the end, it says he sets himself up between the sea and the glorious mountain. You know where that place is? That's where Jesus is coming back. If you go and you study that place, the holy mountain and the sea, that's where Jesus is supposed to come back. And so what he's doing is he's saying, I am putting myself in that place, and he gets himself to the highest authority known to mankind. And what does it say? He ends. He ends. Yet his end shall come and no one will help him. It's like, oh my goodness, that's like so anticlimactic. That's terrible. And that's the point. That's the point. The most powerful ruler in all of history, the one that's supposed to set himself against God as God's enemy, who's going to take, is dealt with without even a thought. He's gone. And that's how little we are compared to God. There's not a nation or a ruler that couldn't be taken out or ended in a moment with a snap of the finger of God. At the end, the greatest human power will just end, and God will be left. You know, as humans, we think we're powerful. We think we have all things figured out, right? Until we have a natural disaster or a pandemic or a loss of life. We think we have it all figured out until we don't. And we realize how small we really are. Every nation, every ruler thought their legacy was going to last. Their empire was going to be it. Every political party, every group of leaders that have thought them to be something. You want to know what happens? They end. Every world war comes to an end. But you know who hasn't? God. God is still ruling. And that's the point that God is trying to make through the angel Gabriel to Daniel, saying, listen, all of these things are going to come. They're going to rise and die and rise and die. And I'm still here and I'm controlling it. And in the midst of that time, it is going to be ugly. It is going to be hard because sin is in this world and rulers and leaders are broken people and they are going to be ugly. But even in that ugliness, I'm going to still use it. I'm going to refine my people. I'm going to make them more like you. I'm going to allow them to suffer so that they understand their need of me, so that we understand we need Jesus. Without Jesus, every nation just looks like every other nation in here. Without Jesus, without God intervening on our behalf, it just ends. And in the end, every nation is going to fall and God is going to be left. Our only hope, if our only hope is in humanity, man, your life is going to be anxious and depressed and fearful. I mean, we get so angry over all of these things. Why? Because our hope is so wrapped up in human power and human authority. If our hope is in God alone and we understand at the end He's the only one left and we can set our hope on that and our heart on that and we understand that we can have that because of the death and resurrection of Jesus. You and I could not have a hope in God that we would still be there with God if it wasn't for Jesus. But because Jesus died on our behalf and suffered for us, when God is still standing there at the end and He brings His kingdom in, a different kingdom, a kingdom that's not of this world, but He brings His kingdom in. If you're a follower of Jesus, you're going to go into that kingdom too forever. And every broken thing in this world is going to be gone. Every rise and fall of a nation, everything that so entangled our hearts and ripped us apart, everything that broke us down day in and day out is going to be gone. And that hope and that peace and rest that we so long for, we're going to have for eternity because God's kingdom is the only kingdom that's left. And He is a perfect and holy God. And He is going to make everything right. So church, how do we respond to this? Well, one, if you're a believer, continually, you got to remember and see God's power and authority. You got to detach your heart and your mind from whatever earthly rulers that you are clinging so hard to and attach it to God because He is the only one that can provide the hope and the peace that you need. We got to stop fearing we should be the most confident people in all of the world because the rise and fall of nations don't matter to us. We want to be there. We want to care. We want to love. We want to help. We want to support. We want to help do our best to bring God's image to God's image bearers. But ultimately, God's got it. And so we need to live with that hope and desire in mind. If you're sitting here and you're not a believer, you've never trusted in Jesus as your Lord and Savior, your hope, your peace will never be satisfied. The next election is going to be over. The next king is going to rule. The next group of people who are going to promise to save you from whatever it is they're going to save you from, you know what's going to happen? They're going to fail too. And they're going to die and they're going to end. This country will end. The next country will end. But there is a God who loves you. And there is a God who died in your place so that you don't have to have a hope in any nation or any king or any authority. There's a God who sent his son who took your place so that you can rest in the God's power and God's sovereignty. So if you're not a believer, you gotta trust in him. Believe that you're a sinner and that you need Jesus. And so as we close, we're gonna sing these last couple songs. And as we do that, I encourage you, as you're a believer, man, just sing these songs out. Remind yourself of the truth of who God is. Don't let it just be words on a screen, but declare God's sovereign control. And even that song we sang right before this, trust, let me submit to you, God. I know that you are in control. And if there's an area where you need to forgive, just ask God, God, forgive me for this. But two, if you've never met Jesus, pray and just ask the Lord to reveal himself to you, and he will. And if you've never met Jesus, you talk to myself or Evan or Lance or Ross, we would love to walk you through what that looks like and help you understand the power and authority that Jesus has, that it brings us so much hope and joy. God, we come before you this morning. And God, we thank you that you have all power and authority. God, we thank you that you've shown us your knowledge. God, that you've shown us, God, that you are in control of all these things, that we know that you, and that God, we can know that you use all of these things on our behalf for your glory and our good. And God, we thank you that even in the end, you've shown us what you were going to do. And God, we know that evil is going to continue to rise until you come back. But even the worst evil, the most powerful being, God, is going to come to an end, and you are going to be left standing. Oh God, let that be our rest. Let that be our hope. God, help us set our mind and our hope on you. Give us a great understanding, a great appreciation for you and your word. God, we thank you for Daniel chapter 8. God, we thank you for books of the Bible, chapters of the Bible that are hard for us to understand, that take a little bit of work to go through. But God, use them in our hearts and our minds. And God, you receive all the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.